Good morning, everyone. Since it's been a few minutes since the introduction, my name is Scott Weiner, and I have the honor of representing San Francisco and San Mateo County in the California State Senate, and thank you for having me today. It's a real honor to be here, and thank you for everything that everyone in this room does to try to really make our transition into a legal thank you. Cannabis industry a success, and I know we're going to get there. I entered the legislature at the end of 2016, was elected in November 2016, the same night that the voters legalized adult use of cannabis, and the same night that a certain individual was elected President of the United States. And so it was an interesting time to enter the legislature with having to deal with everything coming at us from Washington, which is bad. But on the good side, coming during a very exciting time of change for an industry that's played a really important role in California for many, many years, even though for many years we didn't recognize its existence other than to put people in jail. So it's a unique and exciting time in many ways with all of the innovation and creativity and the opportunities to make California a world player in this new in terms of legality and growing industry. So there's an opportunity for our state to be a part of that, and representing San Francisco, we have a major opportunity as well. But there are also many risks that we face. And we have to make sure that we don't let those risks ruin this opportunity that we have, because if we don't take the opportunity, someone else will. We know there are some risks that we have little control over, like the disaster administration in Washington, D.C., which at any moment could come down and start cracking down on cannabis in California. We can't control that. But that's something that is a real risk, and we have to do whatever we can to defend against it. But we also have internally generated risks here in California, and I know you've been talking about some of them. First, the continuing risk of bad bills coming out of the legislature. And the way it works in the legislature is we each get, every 2 years, in the Senate we get 40 bills, in the Assembly we get 50 bills. So it's a lot of bills, thousands of bills that get introduced every year. And you see some of the darndest things that get introduced. And so we will continue to see bills that get introduced around cannabis to limit your ability to market, to reduce your ability to innovate, like we saw with a bill this year saying that alcohol and cannabis can have nothing to do with each other. You're going to continue to see those kind of bills, and it's so important that we be vigilant in the legislature and that the industry, the community, be vigilant at identifying problem bills early. And that doesn't always happen. And sometimes bills have a way of making it deep into the process, and then you wonder, how did this bill get this far? And so we have to be mindful and identify problem bills in the legislature early so we can maybe make them better or oppose them if they need to be opposed. We have significant risks at the local level. When you look at the number of cities in California that have either effectively banned cannabis, it's significant. Reactions locally that you would think that no one was actually consuming cannabis in California, acting as if if we just don't let these businesses get permits here, then there won't be cannabis consumption in our city. And sometimes people put their heads in the sand and pretend like, oh my God, legalization means that people are going to consume cannabis, as opposed to what we know to be the truth, that people have been doing it for many years, and whether it's legal or not does not really determine whether or not someone consumes. It determines maybe whether they consume safely, but not whether they're going to consume. And so, but we have these overreactions. We have cities that technically legalize cannabis businesses, but have such hyper-restrictive zoning that it becomes effectively impossible to do anything. And we actually, representing San Francisco, we're the heartland of, along with Humboldt County, I would say, the heartland of cannabis in many ways, in terms of the medicinal cannabis movement. And just walking down the streets of San Francisco, you sort of know that you're at the heartland of cannabis. Your nose tells you that. But even in San Francisco, we have this tendency to overreact. We had ridiculous zoning laws on the books for years around medical cannabis that even though the state buffer zone, minimum buffer around schools was 600 feet, which is designed for suburbs, because everything under California law is designed for suburbs. In dense, little tiny San Francisco, we zoned it at 1,000 feet, which wiped out most of the city for cannabis dispensaries. And then after legalization happened, this is after I had gone into the Senate, so I was not on the Board of Supervisors anymore, but the San Francisco Board of Supervisors was on the verge of adopting zoning regulations that were so over the top that it would have effectively banned all new cannabis businesses in the entire city and county of San Francisco, with a few tiny little pockets. San Francisco, effectively banning new cannabis businesses. Now, some of us saw that train wreck coming, and we got very, very loud, and we organized, and we stopped it. And the Board of Supervisors adopted not excellent legislation, but much better and more balanced legislation. But even in San Francisco. And since then, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors has banned cannabis establishments in Chinatown. There is a move to effectively ban cannabis businesses in the Sunset by just stopping any dispensary or business from ever going in there, even though the Sunset voted over 60% in favor of legalization, because you have a loud minority. And so even in a place like San Francisco, you have these huge risks. So those risks exist everywhere. And I do have concerns that over time, we will see a contraction of where you can actually have a business. We've seen this with housing in California, where over time, cities ban new housing or ban apartment buildings here and there, or make it harder here, and it layers on itself to the point where we have a housing crisis. I worry that we will see a similar dynamic with cannabis, that locally you'll see layer upon layer upon layer of making it harder, and over time you just see fewer and fewer opportunities for this business model to exist. We have risks of incumbents trying to box out newcomers. When we saw this near train wreck in San Francisco, I think there were at least rumors that there might have been some incumbents that weren't so upset about it, because it just increases their monopoly. So we have to be careful that we don't have that dynamic within the industry. And then, of course, we have the issue of mega corporations potentially coming in to ace out all the small businesses that have created and made the cannabis industry so great in California. And then, of course, when all this happens, what does it mean? It means higher prices for cannabis. It means vulnerable communities that rely on cannabis, particularly for medicinal use, don't get access because we have less supply, less availability, and that means typically higher prices. And of course, all of these risks, and I'll add into there, excessive taxation. We should be taxing cannabis, but when you tax it too high, we know what the result is. All of these things doesn't stop people from consuming cannabis. The demand is going to be what it is, but what it means is there's less availability, there's higher prices, there's higher taxes, and so people just go to the black market. And all we're doing is fueling the black market, because cannabis has been with us forever, it's going to be with us forever, and the question is, do we want to have a rational regulatory regime that brings it into the sunlight so everything is regulated well and healthy and so on and so forth, or are we going to just have a huge black market? And that is the risk that we see. So there are some public policy issues that I think tie into this, and some of them were discussed during the panel, and we need to get this right. We don't want to just have technically legal cannabis. We want to make it actually legal and accessible. So this year, we, of course, tried to deal with the cannabis delivery issue. When we have cities that are saying you can't have a business here, how do people access it? And it's through delivery. The delivery bill did not make it this year, but we need to deal with that issue. We just can't have vast swaths of the state where it's effectively impossible to get legal adult use cannabis. I authored a bill this year which is sitting on the governor's desk, and fingers crossed that he signs it, Senate Bill 829, to make sure that compassionate care programs can continue to exist. And I know, thank you. And for me, for the community I represent, this is very personal because these programs, for the most part, got their start in San Francisco in the 80s during the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, when people were getting very sick and dying and had no money. And these programs formed so people could have their medicine, so that being low income didn't stop you from getting your medicine, so that people could either stay alive, or if they tragically were going to die, that they could do it, it could happen in a way where people could alleviate pain. And that's what it was about. And so when I started to hear that some of these programs were shutting down, it absolutely broke my heart, because I know people who rely on these programs, and people who there is no way they can afford to go into a dispensary and buy their products. They can't afford it. And the idea that we would say to a compassionate care program, we know you have no revenue. We know you make no money because you give it away, but you got to pay your taxes anyway. That is absurd, it's irrational, and that needs to change. And so SB 829 is a first step to making that happen. And because once again, these folks, they're gonna, if they can't get it in a legal way, they need their medicine. They're gonna get it in a way that, guess what, is gonna be less safe for them. It's gonna be underground. On-site consumption is another issue that we have to grapple with. Right now, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that there are 9 on-site consumption locations, 9 that we know of in the US, 7 of them are in my wonderful city. And this model, I'd like to see it spread. It doesn't make sense. If we said, why wouldn't we want people to have these spaces that they can go to, just like we do with alcohol? Say you go to a bar, and then it's monitored. If someone's acting in a weird way or over-consuming, you have people there who can actually intervene and deal with that. And more, as we restrict cannabis consumption in public, at least smoking is often restricted where people live, if they live in multi-unit, because of the smoke issues and the odor issues. So we need to have these spaces, and it can be done in such a creative and wonderful and community-building way. And the spaces that we have in San Francisco I've been in a number of them, and they're amazing. They're really great, and I hope that model can spread and that we don't have a knee-jerk reaction shutting it down. Because again, it's about access, and if you can't consume in public, you can't do it where you live, and there's no on-site consumption, where are you going to do it? You're going to do it somewhere where you're not supposed to do it, or you're not, or maybe some people won't have access. And then lastly, in terms of taxes, we saw in Colorado, and apparently we didn't learn our lesson from Colorado, because in addition to the state tax, we're allowing cities to do whatever they want. In San Francisco, there's a ballot measure, I think it's Prop D, on the ballot, which I'm opposed to. I support taxing cannabis, but it's too high, and I'm disappointed that the majority of my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors chose to put on the ballot an overly high tax rate that, again, will make it more expensive for people to access and will push more people into the black market. So I think this theme of having a rational and balanced approach to regulating cannabis, whether at the local level, whether at the state level, is really important, because it will determine whether we have a robust and growing legal industry, or whether we're going to push everything underground, miss opportunities, lose out on this major economic benefit that California can derive or whether we're going to do it right. I vote that we do it right, but we're only going to do it right if we're really organized and work together in the legislature, at the local level, create space for local elected officials to do the right thing, because this is so important. It's our responsibility, or it's the community's responsibility to create the political space for elected officials to do the right thing. You have some elected officials who are going to do the right thing because that's just how they roll, but others where maybe this isn't the most important issue for them, so they're not going to take a huge risk on cannabis, and you have to create the atmosphere where they believe that the risk is lower, or maybe there is no risk, because they realize their constituents actually want this access. But this industry, this community, I have faith. This is a community that has gone to hell and back with all the raids, with people going to jail, all the criminalization, operating in the shadows for so many years, and everyone persisted. And this is a community that is tenacious and that doesn't give up easily. And I have confidence that we will get through this in a good way, but it's going to take a lot of work and perseverance and coalition building, and I look forward to being a part of that. So thank you very much.